Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. I am Laura Lewis. I'm the director of the WSU Food Systems Program, and you are participating in probably the 16th. I don't even know. We've lost track of what number we're on right now, but we're in our 4th month of hosting weekly WSU Food Systems COVID-19 Hub meetings. And today we are going to be hearing from the WSDA. And we always try to find a relevant picture. And I had one here from when we did the WA meetup, which was last August, 2019. And we're in a lot of PPE gear here, not the face masks, but we're visiting Uli's in Seattle during one of our food systems innovation events, where we were able to look at processing and production aspects of niche meat producers in Washington. And I know that both Nicole within the WSU, Nicole Witham, our program coordinator within the WSU Food Systems Program, and Laura Raymond, the program manager for the WSDA Regional Markets Program, have been working hard on these issues throughout COVID as well. And I know we're going to have a hub meeting coming up probably in the next month or two to really report out on what that looks like. So I am excited to have you all here today. I'm really thankful for the team I'm working with. I already mentioned Nicole Witham, our statewide program coordinator, Abba Kaiser, our statewide project manager, and Tia Taylor, who's our office coordinator, and been really supportive of helping us update the COVID Hub resource on a weekly basis. Just an overview of our meeting today. We're going to just go over the hub itself, talk a little bit about the needs assessment tool, just remind you to take it. We'll go ahead and pop the link to that in the chat so you can go ahead and update it, even if you want during the meeting. We're going to be hearing from the WSDA agricultural economist, Madison Moore, and the WSDA Regional Markets Program Manager, Laura Raymond, and then we'll have time to share at the end of our meeting. Just a welcome again to everyone. Please introduce yourself in the Zoom chat box. We'd love to know who you are, where you're located, and what you do. And just a reminder to use the chat box to post upcoming events that you want us to share on the Hub site, any webinars that are coming up that your program is going to be providing, or you know of webinars that would be useful for the group. Anything else that you think is relevant, links. As we have these conversations, we use this chat box as a great resource to really mine all of those, all of the information that you've shared to make it available on our hub. So again, please use the chat box throughout the meeting today. I wanted to just give a quick update on the work that we're doing around DEI as well. So last week, or over the last couple of weeks, WSU has been working to put together a study circle program, and they've just released the draft 5-week program for internal WSU folks, and we're going to get started with that soon. We're going to actually host one of those through the food systems program for our team members, and then we're going to be expanding this study circle program to our external partners as well. So look to that. And I also just wanted to let the group know that I'm working with the Washington Women in Food Systems program to create a more inclusive and equitable space for BIPOC women in the Washington food system. And so we're going to be talking about that probably in the next 2 to 3 weeks on our hub call. So for those of you not familiar with this, it's a networking group that came together fairly informally and really looking at trying to expand both membership as well as programming to make sure that it's an inclusive space for all Washingtonians, especially women, BIPOC women working in the state. So we will have some updates on both of those programs as we move forward. And then just a reminder, we only have a week and a half left of our Washington Food Security Survey that was spearheaded by the University of Washington and WSU. And we have about 2,000 responses now. So thank you everyone who's been participating and pushing the survey out to your networks. We're still looking for more participation in Central Washington, particularly Yakima, and Spokane as well in Eastern Washington. So the study focus is across the whole state, but we're really trying to get responses from King County, Snohomish County, Clark County, Pierce County, Spokane County, and Yakima County. So we don't have very many responses yet from Yakima. So if you have networks in Yakima that you can share this link with, please do. And I have down here over 1,400 responses. I forgot to update that. We're about 2,000 now. So, and again, the survey will close the last day of July. And there is an opportunity to win a $50 grocery gift card if you participate. So again, please just push that out to your networks. And I appreciate all of you who've already done that. A little bit about the food systems program. So we're about 3 years old, and we evolved from the small farms program at WSU, and we seek to work with communities throughout the state to foster viable farm businesses, optimize sustainable natural resource stewardship, and to promote scaled processing and distribution, always in the pursuit of access to healthy food for all. We have 7 focus areas that our team members work across. Our team is comprised of both internal folks from WSU, faculty and staff, as well as external partners across the state. And many of us work across multiple areas of the food system. So you can see the 7 that were really highlighted when the program was developed on the right side of your screen. The food systems team collaborates on initiatives that promote research, implement change, and provide unparalleled educational opportunities for farm and food system stakeholders throughout the state. And this is just a reminder of the reach of WSU. We're located in all 39 counties and on the Colville Reservation. We have multiple campuses across the state. And just a plug for the Dri-Fi program as well. I've mentioned this before on the hub calls, but if you are challenged in terms of accessing broadband, you can look to many of our extension offices and campuses to be able to plug in the parking lot, and not plug in literally, but plug into Wi-Fi in the parking lot of these locations to be able to still access internet. And many of these Wi-Fi locations are also located at utility districts, district offices, and other municipalities. So if you need further information about that, please reach out to us and we can forward that on to you. So a little bit about the WSU COVID-19 Hub. The purpose of the Hub is to provide a space to connect regularly, both with folks within WSU and our external partners working to support the Washington food system, to collect and update COVID-19 resources to support the Washington food system. We have our dynamic needs assessment tool, our NAT, and then just to provide a space for people to share stories and receive support from one another. We have a calendar of events on our website, which you can access as well. And we post webinars that are both being produced within WSU as well as external webinars, and information of upcoming events that are both relevant to stakeholders in the state as well as nationally. So please check on this regularly. It's updated really every single day. And then our needs assessment tool. So we can drop this link in the chat as well. If you can provide updates for last week, that would be fabulous. This has been going on as long as we have been hosting these calls. And we're really excited about the collection of information and the opportunity to help Washingtonians during this time. We've been able to really gear some of the programs within WSU in response to this needs assessment tool, in particular looking at things like food preservation and trying to provide more information for about fiscal support for food and farm businesses. Okay, so I am really excited today to welcome our speakers, and you may have remembered, and they'll remind you of the survey that everyone took back in the spring around COVID, and I think we had over 800 responses to this, the WSDA did, and we're really excited to hear some of the preliminary results today. So we're welcoming Madison Moore, who's our state agricultural economist, and Laura Raymond, the program manager from Regional Markets. And Maddie, you can go ahead and share your screen now.
Okay, thank you.
So while Maddie is getting that screen up, I'll just say hello to everyone. I think most people on this call are quite familiar with my face by now on these calls, but I know we always have new people joining every week. So I'm Laura Raymond. I manage the Regional Markets Program at the Washington State Department of Agriculture. And that program includes our small farm direct marketing assistance and farm to school programs. And we're focused similarly, we have a lot of parallels to the food systems program at WSU. We're focused on economic viability of small and direct marketing farms, and also making Washington grown foods available for everyone in Washington to the extent that we can make our contribution towards that effort. So we regularly participate in this group, and it's such an incredible resource and group of colleagues to get through this time. But I want to take this moment to actually introduce you to Madison Moore, who is going to be presenting on our survey, but also this is her debut here with this group. And she and I have been working together over the last several months. Pre-COVID, we were just beginning conversations about how exciting it was that WSDA was able to bring on an agricultural economist to support our work kind of across the board, and that person is Maddie. And she and I were just starting to talk about all of the work we could potentially do and how exciting that was, and then COVID happened. And so our work quickly focused to, the impacts of COVID on the ag industry in our state. And so that's what she's going to be talking about. And I'll let her introduce herself more, but just wanted to help welcome her to this community. I know that she's very eager to meet you all and to be a part of this group and understand how we all work together more. So I hope you will give her a warm welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Laura. Thanks for the introduction. First off, I want to make sure, can everyone see the PowerPoint slide? Laura, can you see it on your end? Good.
You look great.
Yep, it looks great.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. Well, like Laura said, I am the newish ag economist. I came into this position in January, and that was right before the start of COVID. So it's been fun having a chance to, work on different WSDA projects, especially this project. I got fully immersed with this survey, and I've had a chance to work with Laura over the past few months, just learning about a regional food system. And I've learned that it's very, very complicated. So I would love to keep working on it and meet all of you and, become immersed in this community. So without further ado, just give you a little rundown of what I will go through today. So I'm going to provide a little bit of a background on the survey for those of you who haven't had the chance to take the survey or who haven't seen it, a little bit about why, when, and how we conducted the survey. And then I'll jump into the questions and some of the results, particularly a small subsection that we looked at and were interested in, which is small farms and locally marketing farms. And then I'm going to open up the floor to questions and discussions so that I can hear your insight. We can throw around ideas. Then jump a little bit into what's next. As Laura mentioned, this is kind of part of some work that the WSDA is really interested in, which is understanding and characterizing regional food systems. And then Laura will give a brief update on the economic relief programs that are currently going on. So this little stat right here was a stat that I pulled from the 2017 Census of Ag. And it kind of provides the impetus to why we decided to do this survey. 89% of all farms in Washington are considered small farms. So by population, by and far, most farms in Washington are small. But that being said, only 6.3% of the total agricultural value in Washington state is actually provided by those small farms. So as a lot of us know, small farms are often overlooked and misrepresented. So we were really interested with this survey in looking at these small farms because we know that it's important to preserve our regional and local food systems. And we know that these food systems provide value far beyond total agricultural value. That value, it resonates throughout our communities. And we're seeing the impacts today with COVID. There's a lot of impacts in terms of, these small farms have been impacted. They've been affected by COVID and they're still being affected. And our regional food system isn't operating the same way as it did 6 months ago. We were also interested because at the time we knew that small farms were probably being affected disproportionately compared to large farms. Large farms are going through their share of problems. They were and they still are with COVID, but small farms were being affected in different marketplaces, and we really wanted to take a look at that. And so our survey did focus somewhat on marketing channels and how producers actually sell product, the gross revenue. We tried to look into gross revenue by marketing channel. And as a lot of you know, surveys are kind of hard to design. So sometimes some of the information like we get out of surveys is different than what we intended. That being said, we did get some great information out of the survey. And ultimately, the purpose of the survey really was to understand the initial and immediate impacts to the sector, to inform our agency and to inform relief requests. So Laura, if you want to add anything here, feel free to.
Sure. I think Maddie's going to talk a little bit about the time frame and some of the real focus that we had going into designing this survey. But this survey was conducted in the early days of this pandemic that we're now in, and sort of the early days of the really acute economic impacts and market changes and food supply chain disruptions. And at that time, our director, Derek Sandison, was reaching out to sectors of the ag industry across the state to try to understand what those early impacts were and trying to quantify them a bit. And there were conversations happening, of course, at the national level that were leading towards framing relief efforts that were really focused on capturing data on economic losses, lost sales, lost markets. And so Director Sandison was reaching out to many of our state agricultural commissions, many of our large sort of production sectors who were doing a lot of this information gathering directly amongst their members and producers themselves, and recognized that we were going to have a gap in information and we needed to be able to characterize some of the impacts to the more locally, regionally marketing and small scale farms, as well as the shellfish industry. And so this survey was intended to reach out to that sector, which are not as organized or necessarily as represented by the traditional commissions.
And we just have a question in the chat as well, if you could define small.
So our definition of small that we went by, we took the USDA's old definition. Small farms are considered those who have a gross annual revenue of less than $250,000 a year. So when we talk about small farms, we talk about less than $250,000 a year. And we also use our survey to break out respondents who actually indicate that they farmed. There were a couple of respondents that indicated that they were involved in different sectors of the industry, including like retail sales, wholesales, and they didn't farm. When we look at the data as a whole, we look at that group overall, but then when we actually break out and do a small farm analysis, which I talk about later, we only look at those who farm and they have a revenue of less than $250,000.
Great, thank you so much.
Yeah. So a little bit, as Laura mentioned, about the survey timeframe and when it occurred. So the survey is really a snapshot in time, and it was at the beginning of the pandemic. We conducted this survey between May 4th and May 10th. So that was a 10-day time frame. And I mean, as I'm sure all of you know and remember, that was a really hectic time. I mean, that was when everything was starting to happen. A lot of producers weren't even selling products yet, and they didn't know what was going to happen. I mean, none of us knew. So it's important to keep that in mind when we look at the data, just understanding that this was a time of great uncertainty. A lot of the data it would look a lot different now if we took a survey. So that being said, it does provide a great baseline for characterizing our regional food system. We believe we actually were able to survey the population we were aiming for. So in terms of the time frame, the survey is broken up into 3 different time frames. we focus on the time frame which we call kind of the COVID time frame, and that is January 1 through April 15th. And then we have a pre-pandemic time frame, and then an after April 15th through the end of this year. So I think we define that as the end of December. So pre-pandemic, we ask a couple of questions regarding things that were occurring before the pandemic, just to distinguish between what COVID impacts were occurring and what other market disruptions were already occurring, like trade disruptions. The January 1 through April 15 was set because really at that time, other federal relief was actually using that time frame, January 1 through April 15, to collect responses and understand what was going on. So we matched our time frame to theirs. And then after April 15th, a lot of these questions were really qualitative, and they were asking predictive things, not the most scientific way to go about it, but really the purpose of our survey was to understand what producers were seeing and what they were estimating in terms of, like, you know, what impacts would be in the future. And there's no better way to understand what's going on in an industry than to actually talk to the people that are in the industry and feel what they're feeling. So that was kind of our way of getting at that. So as a lot of you know as well, we released the survey via various public listservs. So thank you for everyone who got the word out, took the survey even, spread the word. It was very helpful. We had a response rate of 789 respondents, and we consider that pretty dang good. So thank you very much, everyone. So I'm going to jump into the survey questions, provide a little bit of background on those questions for those of you who didn't have a chance to look at the survey or take the survey, and then show a little bit of the results in terms of the general overall 789 respondents. So background questions that we asked were regarding primarily what agricultural business people were involved in, what their farm produced, their gross annual revenue. We asked a couple of questions regarding location. I'm going to click here on the first question. This is a depiction of the results, the overall results. And as you can see, nearly 70% of the respondents actually responded and said they were engaged in farming. A majority of the respondents were also engaged in retail sales and wholesales. And this tells us that our respondents are very diverse, and they're engaged in various sectors of the regional food system and the overall agricultural food system. And so it reinforces the idea that we captured the marketplace we wanted to look at. And then also that our producers are very diversified. And this also reinforces that idea. As you can see, I don't know how many that is, but that's a lot of products. A lot of the producers are engaged in tree fruit, vegetables, and meat. But then besides that, there's a bunch of specialty products. And this was some good information to pull out. It showed that, yeah, our producers are diversified. A lot of them are producing products that at the time were falling through federal aid. Things like eggs, silage and hay, flowers. And like, as you'll notice, 13% indicated they were producing cut flowers at the time. And then lastly, gross annual revenue. About 60% of the respondents indicated that they were in that bracket that we're defining as small farms, which is 250,000 or less. There was also a large percentage of larger farms. For some reason, we had a big response rate of tree fruit growers and then other large farms. And we take this into consideration when we're looking at the data. And when we actually did the small survey, the small farm survey, or not survey, but analysis, we cut out those tree fruit growers that were large, not the smaller ones, but the larger ones. And it definitely changes the data. But it was good to see and have those responses because it helped us solidify some of what we were hearing and understanding as what was happening within the tree fruit industry from our outreach in terms of to commodity commissions and understanding what was going on with trade. So that was actually very insightful for us. So getting back to the survey questions, a little bit about the background. We had a couple of aquaculture specific questions. And as Laura mentioned, that's just because the shellfish industry was very unique in Washington State, and there's a lot going on there. There still is. And there was a lot of things going on before COVID. And we wanted to make sure we were distinguishing between market disruptions before COVID, what was going on during COVID, and see how we could respond to that. And then we asked a couple of questions regarding marketing channels. We knew that certain marketing channels were being affected disproportionately, and we kind of wanted to get an insight into that as best as we could. And then we asked a little bit about employment. And this is pretty important because from what we found, small farms are very different than large farms. Small farms don't rely on outside employment as much as large farms. I'm trying to remember, I think it's about 80% of respondents in terms of small farms said they don't usually employ outside labor seasonally or full-time. And so it gives us insight into federal aid and understanding, you know, a lot of these small farms, they're not relying on outside employment. They have other problems going on and other things going on in terms of COVID. Because employment, of course, was at the time a huge thing everyone was talking about in terms of impacts to the agricultural industry. So in terms of our time frame and understanding what was happening during our COVID time period, which January 1 to April 15, we asked questions regarding gross revenue loss and estimated that by marketing channel. And then also we asked questions about increased demand, which was really interesting. We found that with small farms, about 40% of respondents actually said they were experiencing increased demands at the time. And a lot of that, of course, had to do with increased demands in online platforms or direct-to-consumer markets. And it was really interesting, though, because although those increased demands were occurring, those producers were also saying that they were experiencing net zero gains. The cost to actually start up a virtual market or just change and pivot their marketplace was really hitting them. And so while it seemed like they were increasing demand, it really wasn't on the revenue scale occurring. So then we also looked at estimated impacts in terms of the future and predictions. And these were mostly qualitative responses, but they gave us some good insight into what was actually occurring and what producers were concerning impacts in the future. Oops. Let's see. And then, of course, we ask about market disruptions before January 1 to distinguish between COVID impacts and non-COVID impacts. And then lastly, we asked a couple of questions regarding COVID relief. So I'm going to jump into a little bit of the analysis we did in terms of small and locally marketing farms. So as I noted earlier, we identify small farms as those farms that have a gross annual revenue of less than $250,000 a year. It goes with the USDA definition. And then we also filter it out within our data set, all of those who did not farm. So that resulted in 331 respondents who both farm and ranch and have a gross annual revenue of less than $250,000 a year. So a little bit about the characteristics of this subgrouping. About 65% of these small farms indicated that they farm on 50 acres or less. Out of that 65, there was about 30% that actually farm on 0 to 2 acres, so very small farms. And then also 81% of these respondents indicate that they sell regionally. And that's, out of that 81%, a large portion also sells statewide, nationally, and internationally. And then also in terms of responses across the state, it was great because we got responses from 36 different counties. And I believe there's 39 counties in Washington. So, I mean, it was a great response rate. And the top counties actually were King County, Chelan, Yakima, Skagit, and Snohomish. So it seems like we captured the market we were looking at, or the sector we were looking at, those small farms across the state. It also indicates that, you know, a lot of producers, I kind of get into this in the next slide, but there's a lot of products being produced, just like we saw with that first question on the overall survey response. We're producing a lot of products. We're very diversified. There's small farms across the state. And so COVID impacts are far reaching and very different for even among small producers. So that's kind of broken out here. Those questions about marketing channels really helped us gain insight into what was occurring at the beginning of COVID and how that was impacting different marketing channels. Not surprisingly, on-farm sales is the #1 top marketing channel. And these stats, these first few bullets, are actually by the percent who sell in a given market. So on-farm sales, 58% of respondents indicate that they sell on-farm sales. And then 37% sell via farmers markets and 30% sell via wholesale, distributor, broker, and packer. So this is really interesting because most of the respondents indicate that they participate in more than one marketing channel. About 2/3 of them indicate that. 1/3 indicate that they actually rely wholly on one market. And surprisingly, that 1/3 mainly relied on wholesales. So their impacts looked a lot different than the impacts of producers that rely on several markets. For instance, so of the 30% who actually sell in the wholesale market, on average, these producers sell 56% of their products to that market. And this tells us that producers who sell in the wholesale market are heavily reliant on that market. And this is opposed to, for instance, on-farm sales. 58% indicate that they actually sell in this market, but out of that 58%, they might sell 10% of their sales in that marketplace. So jumping into losses, in terms of losses, producers actually indicate that most of their losses occur, not surprisingly, on-farm sales, and then in farmers markets and direct restaurants. So that kind of reinforces the idea and what we saw from reaching out to producers, understanding that those direct-to-consumer markets were being shut off at the beginning of the pandemic, and a lot of those markets are still being affected. So it'd really be interesting to see what's occurring now. This little infographic is pretty interesting. So this is a breakdown of the responses of all small farms, so all of those who make less than $250,000 a year. And then we actually focus here on an even smaller subsector, which is producers that have a gross annual revenue of less than $100,000 a year. And there's disparity even among these micro producers and the other small farms. So nearly 60% of all small farms reported losses in gross annual revenue between January 1 and April 15th. And 1/3 of these businesses actually indicated losses of up to $10,000 up to that time frame of May when we were starting the survey. So that was interesting to see. It was also interesting to see that what I like to call the micro farms, which, you know, they don't, they have outside jobs, a lot of them. I doubt that this is their full-time occupation. They're the ones that are producing in the bracket of $0 to $10,000 a year. Most of these producers indicated no losses between January 1 and April 15th, but 60% anticipated that they would be experiencing losses in the future. And this is actually very different from that other category, the next category, which is 10,000, and I'm clumping it together with the next category, 10,000 to 100,000. Which nearly 1/2 of these producers indicated they already were experiencing losses, and 80 to 90% were estimating that they would be experiencing losses in the future. So it's interesting to see there's a lot of disparity even among small producers in terms of losses, and a lot of that can be attributed to what those producers were producing and where they were selling their product. So there's a lot more of that analysis that can go on there, but needless to say, our small producers are very diverse. So here's a little bit of insight into what our population responded in terms of challenges. So at the time of the survey, most people are responding. Their top 5 challenges were closed market distribution and sales channels, cash flow issues, increases in operating costs and input costs, inability to pay oneself, and lost sales contracts. I think these challenges really reflect a lot of what's going on today. So while marketing channels have opened up somewhat, a lot of small farms are still struggling to pivot. And the pivoting has involved changes in operating costs, of course, as well as losses in revenues and traditional sales contracts. So while this has been a challenge, We've also seen that there's been a lot of remarkable pivots among producers through collaboration and finding non-traditional ways to sell products. So it kind of goes to show the resilience of small and locally marketing farms. And at the time, all of this was occurring, and these challenges were occurring without a lot of federal aid. So we asked about COVID relief, and at the time it was outstanding. 80 to 90% of farms were not receiving relief from one of the 3 relief packages that were available. And out of the ones that were receiving relief, it was primarily through the Paycheck Protection Program, which after our survey, I believe that was updated. But anyways, in terms of long run concerns, I wanted to highlight some of those concerns here because 2/3 of our respondents actually indicated that they were concerned about the long run impacts of COVID-19. And at the time, they seemed like long run impacts, and now they're coming to fruition. I mean, those impacts are occurring. So most of those impacts regarded uncertainty around the future and market closures. A lot of producers expressed concerns about their customer base and how that would change with a changing marketplace. A lot of producers understood that some of their products were actually luxury products, and the thought that people are being impacted economically and financially. There was concern over people attending farmers markets and people still buying their products. There was also a lot of concern about decreased tourism around large events. So we still haven't hit the fall yet when a lot of festivities happen, but a lot of the respondents were indicating that they were concerned about their on-farm festivities. So U-picks, corn mazes, a lot of those fun things that usually happen in the fall time. People are concerned that those would not occur and that would really impact their business. So I think there's still a lot of things that may occur down the line due to COVID. But that being said, we've seen that over the past few months, producers have pivoted. And so maybe they will pivot. It's impossible to tell. We're all uncertain at this point. But anyways, to summarize this, our survey was really able to target this population that we wanted to look at within Washington, which was the small and locally marketing farms. It was able to shed light on some of the diversity within the small farm sector and across the larger agricultural industry, and also shed light on the resilience of the small farm sector. And I think the concerns of these producers really echoes the concerns of larger producers as well. It echoes across the board because it shows that, you know, agriculture, it's very resilient, our agricultural industry, because it's diverse, but it is being impacted and producers are having to shift and there's losses occurring across the board. So we still may have a ways to go with COVID, and who knows if the markets will really recover to the way they were before, but the sector does seem to be adaptable. So with that, I want to open up the chat box, open up people blurt things out about questions or discussion. I'd love to hear what you've seen in the past few months, or even during the time frame of the survey, or even if you just have questions about the data, feel free to throw those out.
Great, thank you so much, Maddie. I know Jason Alves asked a question about shellfish. Did you want to follow up on that, Jason?
No, I think you covered it. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Okay, great. Brandon Bourne asked, says here, seems like the coordinating function between producers and consumers would be well facilitated by a strong network of FPCs, and at least is likely not a role that the private sector is well suited for. Should we be attempting to recreate the markets as they were before, or is this an opportunity for something better? And Brandon, you can expand on that more if you'd like.
It's just an observation that much like we lack some of the market infrastructure at the regional and mid-scale, we also lack the institutional infrastructure. And I think about it's obviously shocking at the federal level that there hasn't been more coordination to help the ag industry make the pivot necessary. And so we see wasted food and we see hungry people, and these kinds of inconsistencies are on one level shocking and another level not shocking at all for an administration that doesn't think government has a function in this way. And we don't have a, that's not our state government. And so I do hold out some hope that that we can actually, as we understand these challenges better, develop systems to help farmers, ag producers make those pivots and reconnect to markets. But it just strikes me, having helped establish a local food policy council in the Puget Sound area that has essentially died on the vine, as has Portland's, that now's the time that it would be really great to have regional organizations across the state who have representation from a wide variety of folks in the ag and food sectors to be able to coordinate. And I don't think that's, as I say in the comment, I certainly don't think this is a particularly good role for the private sector. And I do think that it's probably something for the public sector. I just don't know exactly what that looks like. So just a little bit of a observation, a frustration, and then just a bandwidth tax on my own negativity, which is constant for those people who know me well, is just to say, gosh, can't we, like any other good neoliberal, but perhaps in a different way, think about taking advantage of a crisis and coming out of it stronger and better, rather than trying to recreate what used to exist in its flawed way? How can we be more sustainable? How can we begin? I mean, COVID is an obvious opportunity to shorten food chains, to build regional markets, to leverage the fact that the global industrial model is particularly threatened by pandemics. So are we thinking about that? And what would that look like for building something in the future that is not just simply recreating what we had now? So just a whole set of questions.
That's a great point. Brandon, thank you for bringing that up. And we could spend a whole session on talking about food policy councils and food policy forums. I will say at the state level, there is a Washington State Food Policy Forum, which did actually pivot in its own, which I'm involved with and Laura Lewis involved with, and I'm not sure who entirely is on this call. Mary Embleton is involved. I'm sure there are others who are on this call today who are engaged with that forum. It did, at the request of the governor's emergency response management efforts, make a pivot of its own and start to look at the actions that it was recommending for general food system improvement, and look at those through a lens of not emergency response to COVID, but early action response to COVID. There is also another entity at the state level that has been in a much more emergency response mode, coordinating, I would say, hunger relief and response from more of an emergency management perspective. And there has been some intersection between that coordinating group and the Food Policy Forum. But I think that there's plenty of work and lots of conversations to have there. There's a whole bunch of questions coming in through the chat. I'm going to try to keep up with them. There's a couple questions about, are we going to do an end of the season survey? And I think we have a little bit of an update on kind of next steps that we can pick up later. And someone is asking a question, about whether we asked any questions, Maddie, about the kinds of pivots that farmers were pursuing at the time of the survey.
No, so we didn't actually ask any questions about how producers were responding to changes, but we did capture some of that information in our qualitative responses. A lot of people really took the survey as an opportunity to, talk about things beyond the agricultural industry. So it provided us with a broad perspective. A lot of people noted that they have outside jobs, and at the time they may have lost those jobs or they were being furloughed, and they were really worried that that was going to impact their small farm or their small production business. But in terms of pivots, there were some responses. A lot of people were taking up virtual platforms, but they were experiencing challenges regarding setting up those platforms, getting the word out, you know, cost-wise and both technical-wise. But that would be something that would be interesting if another survey was done, to actually ask how this group changed and pivoted. Because as a lot of us have seen, the small farming sector has actually done pretty well in certain aspects in terms of responding to COVID. And we'll see what happens in the future, if that helps.
I'll add there that I think we did not ask a question specifically about that, as Maddie said, but in some of the comments that we received in the more narrative qualitative responses that Maddie referred to earlier, one of the really interesting points that was, you know, when we were able to look more closely, was that those farmers that were identifying surges in demand were, Maddie mentioned this before, but I think it's a really important part. Those surges in demand were not offsetting their anticipated losses. So I think, you know, we were already, that was very early when we were doing this survey. A lot of farmers markets were not yet open based on their regular schedule. Farmers markets that were year round, many were not open and unclear if they were going to be able to open. So, you know, there certainly are meat producers and dairy producers and others who likely had product available for sale, but it's kind of, it's a unique period of time to survey in Washington State, because it really was kind of pre-market, prime market season and pre-prime production season. And so we want to dig in more to the data in those sort of predictive questions that we asked. And I think, and we'll share that as we do, to understand more of that nuance, even though we didn't ask specific questions about it.
And if I could jump in briefly, this is Sarah Collier with UW. And I'll leave it to you, Laura Raymond, to talk about future work. But I just wanted to mention that we are looking at following up with qualitative interviews to get more into the pivots and the type of pivots going on, and put a little bit more data behind sort of the understanding of how small regionally marketing farms are contributing to resilience in the system, and also working with others to talk about a follow-up survey as well.
Yeah, I think to maybe put a little bit, thank you, Sarah. I'm glad you spoke to that, because actually it'd be great to have you and Laura talk a little bit more about potential future surveys and follow-up as you are prepared to do so, not to put you on the spot. But I also think, just to provide people a little more context with, you know, that weird time frame of the January to April 15th. So at the time that this survey was going out, the federal government and USDA was asking producers what their losses were during that time period. And so we wanted to make sure, from our role as a Department of Ag, responding to USDA and to federal lawmakers who were creating responses to COVID, that we had that data point they were looking for. And so that was driving a lot of that, of the way that this survey was framed, was in order to sort of capture a picture of those losses. And we chose to ask a lot more of these additional questions because we knew, based on the circumstance of Washington State and our familiarity with this sector, that asking for a straight dollar loss between January 1 and April 15 wasn't really going to get the picture of what the COVID impacts were on this sector in our state. And so we added all these other questions to be able to provide a little bit more context. And back to the stat that Maddie shared at the very beginning, we also know, I think all of us who work in this realm know, that our small producers are often undercounted in terms of their production value, and also in terms of the many ways that they provide value in their local economies and to our food system as a whole. But they are the majority of farms in our state. And so to really understand the impacts of something like a pandemic and the closure of the entire food service sector upon which many of these farms depend, you know, we needed to ask more questions than just a straight dollar figure. So but we also needed to balance it with the fact that, you know, as we all know, everyone and their best friend is sending out a survey to producers right now, and we could only ask so much of their time. I just want to check the chat here, or anyone else who's been tracking it. Are there other key questions? And everyone speak up, please. We'd love to hear, you know, does this resonate? Does any of this feel really off from what you are experiencing in your regions?
And have you seen anything differently, like since the survey?
Cheryl, did you want to speak up? I know you have a couple comments in the chat, not to put you on the spot. I can also read them.
That's okay, you're not putting me on the spot. So yeah, I was just curious about kind of echoing back to the online, going back to the pivot, given that on-farm sales are the highest percentage. I was just curious if you had gotten any anecdotal feedback or any sense of how successful farmers had been in kind of pivoting to online sales, curbside pickup, expanding online options, and home delivery. You know, because I live in King County, Seattle, and, you know, and also at the time that COVID was going down, working on Farm Guide, and so kind of getting information from farmers around the state of how things were shifting. But that doesn't necessarily capture everyone. Those could be farms that have a more consumer-facing focus. I'm just curious, anything anecdotal there might not have been captured in the survey. And then the second piece was kind of and again, ears to the ground around merging technical needs and issues for small farms who are pivoting to more online sales. And maybe that's going to be another survey. So that's it.
Yeah, thank you, Cheryl. You kind of cut out on the second question, but to answer the first question, a lot of our qualitative responses were interesting because there were some responses that regarded how farmers were pivoting. And, you know, I want to highlight the fact that this survey was really early on. And so it was really during the height of uncertainty. And a lot of farmers weren't they were producing, but they weren't selling yet. And so they hadn't pivoted yet. But there was a group of respondents, and it was disheartening to see, but there was a group of respondents that were very concerned about health, and they might have been older. And they were basically saying, like, you know, I'm not going to pivot. I'm not going to go sell at a farmer's market because I don't want to be affected by this physically, or I don't want my employees to be affected by this physically. But that being said, who knows what they did? I know that farmers markets, I'm in Yakima County, and our farmers market is up and running. There's some guidance and differences in the way that it's running, but it is running. And so, like, in terms of pivots, we weren't able to really capture what producers were doing at the time, just because a lot of them weren't selling in the marketplace yet, and they weren't pivoting yet. But as we mentioned before, hopefully, and we're working on it, there'll be some follow-up work that will have to do with resilience and how farmers have reacted. And Laura, maybe you want to add to this, if you have any examples of what you've heard in terms of reactions and pivots.
Sure. I mean, I think, you know, I'm sure others on the call have similar observations, but, you know, farms are making a lot of changes. But I think one of the things that was captured in some of the responses, which I continue to hear, is a recognition that people are needing to adapt this year. So, you know, I think we've all seen that CSA memberships are greatly expanded. A lot of farms that maybe were thinking about reducing or stopping their CSA chose to go 100% or nearly 100% into their CSA. A lot of farms have tried to increase their online farm stores and are looking at different delivery and distribution mechanisms. People are looking at, I'm seeing a lot more people doing pop-ups, pre-order at kind of a delivery location to an area where their customers come pick up. But one of the things that was reflected in the early comments that I'm still seeing now is a little bit of hesitancy about how much to invest in this sort of a business shift, because there is so much uncertainty about the market in the future. So customers who are really eager to buy local now, or ready to sign up for a CSA 2 months ago, that there's a lot of concern about, will that customer base be able to be maintained into the future? We know meat producers, local meat producers are seeing, through the roof demand for their product, but similarly, investments in scaling up to meet that demand are expensive. And there's a business risk there, and there's uncertainty about, again, whether that demand will hold. So I don't know if that resonates with other people. I think I want to talk a little bit about some of the next steps, and also just a little bit of update on federal aid programs. But I want to make sure there aren't anyone else has any other observations you want to share or last questions.
Hi, Laura, this is Hannah Browse. Great job to you and Madison. Madison, thank you so much for that awesome presentation. I have another call at 11, so I have to hop off. But when you just said the next steps, that's exactly where I was gonna try to plug in before I jumped off. I was curious, while we have so many very smart, very savvy folks that are deeply engaged in the ag industry, it sounds like in the future there will probably be some type of a follow-up, and asking similar questions that'll help us to gauge the trends will be really important. But I also wondered if maybe we could use the chat box for folks on this call, if they had questions that they thought might be really important to ask, that maybe that those could be captured in that chat box and then given to whichever group of individuals or agencies might do a follow-up. So I know we've been doing a lot of surveys, and I was just thinking, gosh, wouldn't it be great if somehow we could, observe the trends, but also maybe make sure that we're capturing any other data that would be particularly useful to our agencies. So just a little, kind of just a thought before I jumped off. But you guys, great presentation, awesome work. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Hannah. So just to jump into the next steps really quick. So this survey is, as Laura mentioned earlier on, part of our ongoing effort at the WSDA to actually characterize our regional food system. And this data has actually proved to be very helpful. We captured a good population, and we think it will help us characterize that food system. We are also currently collaborating with a graduate student at the University of Washington. And Sarah, you can speak more to this, but she's really interested in understanding resilience and really those pivots. And so we look forward to collaborating with her. She'll be using our survey to actually answer some of those questions. And lastly, before I turn it over, if this data is of interest to you, feel free to reach out. It is available. And we also would love to hear other things you have to say, any other discussion points, any questions you have. So that, Laura, Raymond, do you have anything else to say about next steps?
No, I just, Sarah and Laura, do you want to, I know that you have some potential plans to continue to look at these issues. Is there anything you'd like to update folks on now?
Yeah, sure. And Sarah, please join in as well. And I wanted to just mention also, there was a couple questions about in the chat regarding need for information about food preservation, or also are we still collecting ongoing information about gaps in technical assistance. And just to put a plug in for the needs assessment tool, it can be taken weekly by anyone across the food system, and we can sort that to see what producers are saying. So I know Clark County has made a big effort recently to push that out so that they can get some information moving forward for their Food Policy Council and some of the work that they're doing. And one of the things that I've been working with the University of Washington on a couple different research projects, and one of them that we're pulling together is with Sarah Collier, and she said her internet is a little bit unstable, so she might not be able to join in, but we're really excited about working with Maddie and a graduate student at the University of Washington to look at the results of this survey and be able to do some follow-up work in the fall to look at the response of food and farm businesses in Washington State, but also to look at work with the WSDA to come up with a more comprehensive way to understand regional markets in Washington. So that is definitely in the works. We haven't gotten started yet on that work, but we've had some preliminary discussions about it. And we're really excited about the fact that that Maddie and others have been able to do some of the preliminary analysis of this survey tool that was deployed in the spring so that we can build off of that. Laura, Raymond, and I have spoken often about the lack of information that we have across Washington in regards to small farms and regional markets to help us understand what's changing, what's needed to help support a more resilient food system in Washington. We often rely on the USDA data, which is fairly incomplete and doesn't always capture this sector very well. So we're really looking at some I guess, big picture ideas about what we could be doing in collaboration with Maddie to understand the Washington food system, both during COVID, but beyond. So we talk a lot about, you know, the food system 2.0, like what is our future food system going to look like and how can we understand what's needed. And I don't know if Sarah is there, but she can. Yeah.
I'm back. Sorry, I dropped out and missed some of that. But I will just say, yeah, we, in terms of what to expect and look for, we do, the graduate student who is working with Maddie is going to be conducting some interviews early this fall, so in August and September ideally, and we may well be reaching out to many of you on the call to help to arrange those, and those will be geared towards providing, you know, to fleshing out the picture of what Maddie has already been presenting and digging a little bit deeper into resilience and pivoting, and then working with the WSU Food Systems team and WSDA Regional Markets. I think we have a lot of potential to put together an end of season survey that delves both into, you know, what the economic impacts were in fact, and gets into more of these resilience questions at the same time. And we're working right now, as Laura Lewis mentioned, we're just in preliminary discussions, but we are gathering the background data, also scanning all the many surveys of the ag sector across the country as well, to make sure that this time, you know, that we're able to put a lot of thought into how we develop this for our Washington food system later in the fall.
Great, thanks. So I guess the last piece I would say is just that, as we all know, this information is so important. I mean, I say this information very broadly. Information that characterizes our regional food economy in Washington State, and it in a multifaceted ways. And so we are eager to make this data available to anyone who is looking to, you know, for whom it might be helpful to do deeper research or analysis, and to keep this sort of collective conversation going around what research can really support all of the work that we do in supporting this sector of food and farming. And to that last piece, I wanted to share, knowing that a lot of us work in direct support of farms and food businesses and food access in our communities, I wanted to share a little bit of an update on some of those federal economic programs that the survey showed our farmers were not taking advantage of, and just provide a bit of an update. So, I'm not going to go through these in detail. I put a lot of detail on the slides so that you'll have it there. I won't talk about it all. I just wanted to sort of highlight where you can find helpful information as resource providers to help you provide this information to the producers you work with. So, you know, the federal relief programs to date that might be beneficial for small farm and food businesses are really kind of two parts. There's Small Business Administration programs and there's USDA programs. At the time the survey was released, small farms were not eligible to apply for the EIDL. Could you pop back one real quick? But they were eligible for the payroll protection program, and I think that's in part why we saw more people taking advantage of this program. There have been some changes to this which might make it more interesting for producers you work with. So just to be really clear, self-employed people can apply for payroll protection. let's see, I think the application is open until August, start of August 8th, I think might be the first day. So there's still a couple weeks to apply. Self-employed farms do need to demonstrate that they had self-employment income. And for farms that use a Schedule F, businesses need to fill out a Schedule C or a Schedule F. They do need to show some net farm profit. So for farms who are not taking advantage of those two challenges, those may be two challenges. It can be up to 100% forgiven, so it can function as a grant. But for a lot of businesses who are concerned about not meeting the criteria for that forgiveness, it's important for them to know that it's not an all or nothing. So if you sort of meet 75% of the conditions for forgiveness, 75% of the loan is forgiven. Yeah, I think, and they've extended the amount of time allowed to use the loan. So then the EIDL, the Economic Injury and Disaster Loan, is also actually kind of a grant. And I think that's important for people to know. The deadline to apply for this is December, and funds are still available. So there was a lot of press early on about how there was no money left in these loans, and only big businesses who weren't supposed to get them got them. Well, funds have been added since. And for a while, only agricultural businesses were allowed to apply, which I think was set up to kind of cover up, adjust for that lack of eligibility early on. But farm businesses are eligible, and businesses can get potentially up to $10,000 as a grant. And there seems to be kind of some sort of a calculation that in terms of how much of a grant a business might be eligible for based on how many full-time employees they have. It seems to be coming in at about, businesses are getting about $1,000 per FTE, or perhaps per employee who may not be FTE. It's a little unclear, and that can be self-employed, so it could be the owner operator of the farm, but you need to apply for the loan to get the grant. However, if you apply for the loan and you're awarded the loan, or even if you're found maybe not to be eligible for the loan, you still may get the grant. So this is something just for farms to understand. For people who do want to take out the full loan, it's an up to 30-year term, 3.75 interest rates. Nonprofits are also eligible for this loan. So farmers markets that are incorporated as a nonprofit that may need operating funds can also apply for this, and they have a lower interest rate. And there is a great video on how to apply. It's a 30-minute video, and it's really straightforward. Great. Next slide, please. So you've probably also heard about the USDA programs. I'm going to go through these really fast. The CFAP program consists of two elements: direct payments and the food boxes. And we've talked about the food boxes a lot in this group before, but the CFAP direct payments are just what they sound like, direct payments to farmers. They may or may not be very helpful for the farmers you work with. They are not really designed well to work well for direct marketing farms or for highly diversified farms. And there are a lot of changes. This eligibility and the terms of this program is changing weekly. So I want to make sure that I have another slide with links to these pages, but the FLAG and NSAC both have really great resources for you to work with. Okay, next slide, please. A couple other USDA programs for if you work with farms who do have FSA farm loans. There is a disaster set-aside program that allows them to essentially move their payments from this year to the very end of their loan term. So depends on their loan term, but it's sort of a grace period for some of their payment. They still have to pay it, but they don't have to pay it right away. EQIP has funds available for to help with costs of livestock disposal. So we're all hoping that we won't come to that in Washington State, but if our animals needing slaughter surpasses our slaughter capacity, or processing capacity, producers may be looking for this sort of a resource. So that's a good one to know about. And then of course, more locally, counties have received CARES Act funds, and some of them are now in our state, and some of them are rolling out various types of programs that benefit farms. I know Pierce County, King County are two I know of off the top of my head that have made PPE or cost share for PPE available. Some cases there are direct grants to producers and other sorts of business support and relief. Okay, and then these are just some excellent resources that you're probably aware of already, but they have been really tracking these issues really carefully and developing really helpful resources for resource providers. So they're linked here, but the Farmers Legal Action Group has been creating guides to all of this federal aid and keeping them updated even as these changes are coming out. NSAC as well has a really great page on the CFAP program, the direct payment program for producers. And they are tracking issues with small farms not being served by the program. So it's worth it for you to look at some of the, if that's a concern with the producers you're working with, you might want to track what they're doing and how they're engaging producers in that work. And then of course, we've been trying our best to keep, just like the hub page, we've been trying our best to keep the WSDA regional markets COVID resources page updated with links to all these programs and links to these resources. Some of them that I have here are not yet on the website, but most of them are. And that is it, I think. Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Maddie and Laura. And I want to just see if the group has more questions that we can, or anything else that they'd like to share related to the work that regional markets and WSDA is doing. I wanted to just point out that I've heard and I've seen, especially from the regional markets, the farmers markets that I'm near, a loss in sales, so obviously down. Some of them have said up to 50% from where they were last year. But I've also heard other people say that some of their farmers are doing better than they've ever done at the farmers market. And so that's something that I would just love to hear as well, if people have stories or thoughts about how farmers markets are doing right now.
If I could jump in really quick, we did see with the survey at the time that we took the survey that a lot of people responded that actually, despite the challenges to farmers markets, flower production and nursery production was up. There was like an extreme demand for nursery products. And take into consideration, this was at the beginning of spring when we did the survey, so it was in May. So there's already probably a demand there. People are looking to plant flowers and other nursery products, but it seemed like it was an extreme thing at the time. And I don't know if that's carried on now through the season. It'd be interesting to hear if anyone has insight.
We have a comment here that it would be great to get Colleen Donovan from the Washington State Farmers Market Association to report out on one of these calls. And I'll definitely reach out to her and see if she's available. It would be great to get an update on how our farmers markets are doing across the state.
I can share that I know, and this is probably the others hear it as well, that many farmers market organizations are really challenged and struggling right now. In large part because of the adaptations they're making to make sure they continue to be open and safe places. That has resulted in either in lower volume of shoppers, and in some cases, and lower numbers of vendors in other cases. And since farmers markets themselves rely on that commerce to support their operations, they are struggling. And trying to get creative about how to, continue to put producers first while also remaining solvent and operational themselves. there's a lot of creativity and resiliency going on there as well. And similar to many other sectors, you know, they rely on volunteers. And I think my understanding, this Colleen would be able to clarify better, but that they are still being able to get volunteers, but similarly to food banks and others, you know, it may be some of their tried and true volunteers may not feel comfortable because of risk factors for COVID. So a lot of changes, I think. I would just say observing and from the perspective of the work we've done with WSFMA and the governor's office to clearly identify that farmers markets were essential food businesses during the initial shutdown. Also to clarify what types of products are considered agricultural products and therefore able to be sold at farmers markets as essential businesses. I've been able to see firsthand, you know, how dedicated and committed and resilient and creative farmers markets and farmers market managers have been. So I'd say whatever love we can give them, they would appreciate it. And I see there's a question from Cheryl who needs your email address. Maddie, could you just flip back to that slide so people can copy it down if they want to get a copy of the survey results?
Yeah, feel free to reach out to Laura or I if you want a copy of the survey results, or you have more questions or want to discuss anything.
Great, thank you. And we have a couple other comments about farmers markets. I think that this would be a really useful topic for a future hub meeting. So we'll definitely reach out and see who we can get to present. If any of you are interested in presenting about what's happening in your region and you're involved with a farmers market organization, please let us know. We also had a recommendation to have a future hub meeting on food policy councils and their role during COVID. And so if you're interested in that topic and would like to present or would like to recommend a presenter, please let us know in the chat box so we can follow up with those folks or yourself. And any other questions right now before we move on to just open discussion and any other topics that people want to address before we end the call? Anything that anyone wants to share in particular that's going on in their realm? Anything of interest? Don't want to put anyone on the spot. I can announce what we're going to be doing next week. So July 31st, we'll be starting at 10 a.m. We'll be updating our website weekly. Please take the needs assessment survey. We do post the results. I haven't posted, I think we're all the way up to the last 2 weeks that are posted on our website. And we can also sort those reports for you, for your county, for priority communities you may be working with, for tribes. So just let us know if you need any of that information. We're really hoping to get more participation every single week so that we have a robust data set that we can share. Please send us your calendar events and links to resources. We'll make sure that the resources that were in the presentation today are posted on our website. And next week, we're going to hear from Organic Seed Alliance with Michaela Colley and Kara Luriz. And they're going to be talking about the work that they're doing to support farmers during and beyond COVID. And in particular, we're going to talk about the MILPA project. I haven't had a chance to reach out to Linda McLean. I'm not sure if she's on the call today, but we were going to put her on the spot and see if she would be interested in sharing her collaboration with OSA as well. As some of you may have recalled, about a month ago, we had Valerie Segrist from the Native American Agricultural Fund and Nora Frank from the Northwest Portland Indian Health Board on, and they talked about a MILPA project that happened in the Southwest of the United States to distribute seed blankets and food blankets to tribal communities. And from that call, We have our own Washington MILPA project that got started in collaboration with the Colville Tribe and Organic Seed Alliance. So we're going to be hearing a little bit about that next week as well. If you have recommendations for future speakers, presentations, please let us know. We are really excited to keep this momentum going and to continue to schedule out for the next several months. So again, I just want to thank you all for your participation and for your commitment to supporting the Washington food system during COVID and beyond. And again, if you have any other questions or comments, you can put them in the chat box. If there's anything else you'd like to share, please do so. And I just want to, again, thank our guests today from the WSDA, Laura Raymond and Maddy Moore. I know we'll hear from you in the future many more times, and it's just always, just such a gift to have our state resource agencies be able to share the work that they're doing.
Yeah, thank you, Laura, and thank you everyone for listening in and for your participation and helping really get this survey out. So we hope to hear from you, hopefully with questions and discussion points, and work with you in the future.
Great, thank you. And just a reminder, we did record this session, so it will be available on our YouTube channel probably sometime this afternoon. So if you want to be able to refer it to someone who might have missed it, there was a lot of really important information in there. So please feel free to share that link with your network so that they can watch this hub meeting and get caught up on the work that the WSDA is doing, as well as all those really relevant links to fiscal resources for food and farm businesses. Okay, well, thanks everyone. Have a great weekend. And I look forward to seeing you all next week.
Thanks, Laura. Great job.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good work, Maddie.
Thank you.
Gwen, I saw your comment. I think that would be great to host a call with the ELF collaborative as well. So I feel like we've got some good meaty speakers lined up over the next probably month. It looks like it, with potentially getting a call with the Washington State Farmers Market Association, maybe a call going specifically around food policy councils, and then something related to ELF. And we can probably put ELF sooner rather than later, because I know we're doing a big push right now in terms of the landing page and the resources that are available.
Great.
And Laura, do you want me to share my slides with you, or Nicole?
They're in the presentation, but you can as well, and we can make those available. Nicole, do you want there to be, I know it looks like she's having a conversation with someone else right now, but yeah, you can go ahead and send them to us, and we can either post them on our website or as just a resource for people to access. So if you're fine with that, we would be happy to do that. Okay, great. Yeah, just go ahead and send them. Either if it's the file's too big, you can also put them in a Google Drive if that's easier, and just share the Drive link with us. But yeah, you can go ahead and send them either to myself or Nicole.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you so much. Thanks for hosting this call.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I'm really happy to meet you virtually. I can't wait to meet you face to face.
Yeah, same here. Hopefully more collaboration in the future and face-to-face conversations.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Hey, Laura, Laura Lewis, is the presentation from last week from Jason